Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Curt 4-pole trailer wiring harness on a 2020 Ford Edge. Now this is specifically for the SE and SEL models. Now if you're adding a hitch to your Edge, it's definitely worth picking up 4-pole trailer wiring harness, and that's essentially to keep you safe and legal while going down the road. Even if you don't plan on pulling a trailer, it's nice to have this in place. That way, if for whatever reason you may need to tow a small trailer while you're moving or whatever it may be, you'll have this ready to go, and that's going to give you your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights on your trailer, keeping you safe and legal. And as far as the installation goes, this one uses a factory style plug that goes into the back of the taillights. So there's really you don't have to be a wiring expert to get this done. There's a little bit of butt connectors that you'll have to attach and eventually run a power wire up to the battery, but overall it's pretty easy. There's also going to be an inline fuse and it's module protected, meaning any faulty trailer wiring, or if you have any shorts that happen, it's never going to affect your factory wiring. So there's really no risk in getting this installed. And overall, pretty easy to do, but I'll walk you through all the steps to make sure you get yours installed. So let's take a look at that. Before we get our wiring installed, let's just kind of take a look at what we're dealing with. There's a lot of wires here, and it's all really easy once you kind of make sense of it all. It all comes off of our module, which keeps everything protected. It's kind of the brains of the operation. So starting off, the red, yellow, and brown wires. This is going to be for our driver's side. And this is going to give us our left turn signal, our running lights, and also brakes. You'll see that this connector is going to match up with a factory style and just kind of tee into it. So this is going to plug into our tail light here on the driver's side. Going along with that, we also have a green wire, singular, and this is just going to give us our right turn signal, but it's quite a bit longer. You can see that it's bundled up here, and that way we can route it over. So our module is going to live on this side. Now we also have a white wire, which is going to be a ground wire. It's a ring terminal at the end, and this is just going to ground out by either using a factory ground or a self-tapping screw to get that mounted up. We have our 4-pole wiring, which obviously where we're going to connect it to our trailer, so we'll eventually route that by our safety chain loop to keep that stored up. And then finally our black wire, you'll see is already pre-stripped here. This will eventually go to the spool of wire connected, or that's in our kit, and we'll connect this and run it up to our battery to give us 12-volt power. We'll just hold on to this in the back here, and we can begin by removing our tail lights. So pretty easy, just a small flathead screwdriver. You'll see this small piece here. Just kind of pry on that. And once you get that popped out, that's going to give us access to a T25 screw. So we'll go ahead and get that removed. And as we remove hardware, I recommend having a nice organized spot to keep this. That way, when you're done with your install, everything will go back all together. You won't be having to look for any loose pieces. So we'll go ahead and get that out. And then with the tail light, kind of just, what I've found with these, just kind of wiggle them back and forth if you can. And there's going to be alignment tabs that these pop into place. So trying to loosen that up is going to be key. But making sure we obviously don't damage our paint or our taillights in the process is going to be key. So if you need to, sometimes dust, dirt, and debris will build up in here. So spraying a little bit of soapy water back where those alignment tabs are is definitely going to be helpful. And once I get this out, I can show you exactly where those tabs are located. So just with a little wiggling and pushing on the taillight to where it goes to the back, the tabs are pretty well aligned to where it needs to go straight back. So we have one here, and then we have two of them here. So if you need to, what you can do is use a plastic trim tool and find a nice spot, but just make sure that you're pulling it straight back. Now, Ford on these vehicles in particular, they don't make it super easy as far as the plugs. They're kind of tucked down here, but we'll get this separated by pushing on a tab. And we'll get that unplugged. We can set this taillight aside, and then we'll just go ahead and remove our passenger side. Now I mentioned that this plug is kind of tucked down there, and this is kind of a tricky one that Ford has put us in. So normally you can just put a pull wire or a fish wire down, something to tape up that connector and pull it up, but it's very tight here. So what we're going to do is start to separate the fascia. So you'll see these plastic tabs where it clips into. Just kind of separate it as you can and kind of pull back as you go to the next one. And what we're kind of trying to do is just create a gap for us to feed our clips in. So just take your time here. It's very easy to crack the plastic. You can see here, that's kind of what we're looking for. because the gap that we're going to run those wires through is going to be in this area, but it does help to have them all kind of popped. That way you're not putting too much stress on the further down clips. So as I kind of get this set back, I'm using a plastic trim tool here that works very well. If you're gentle with a flathead screwdriver, you could probably use that as well. And as I mentioned, put tension on it, because as you release it, a lot of times it's going to want to go back and kind of snap itself back in. So with it like this, what I'm going to do is grab my pull wire. So you can use string with a nut attached to it to drop it down. What we use here is a airline tube, which is flexible, and we'll just feed that down. So whatever method you have, we'll just pass this down. And then once it comes out on the bottom side, just get a hand on it. And it might be helpful if you have a flashlight or something, you can put it on the bottom side and you'll see that there's going to be a gap that's going to make it nice and easy for us to get this pulled down. So I'll grab my harness and we're going to tape it up to this. Now, being that it's very tight, we're going to try to keep this as flat as possible. So don't tape these up like that. We're going to just kind of spread it out and then tape this up. And then we're going to pull this up until we get this pulled up from our fascia. And you may need to peel this back. Again, a flashlight's probably going to be helpful here. There's a lot of different things that clip can catch on, so just take your time. You don't want the tape to separate and have to redo the process, so just ease it up. And if it's getting caught, sometimes just jostling it around will help it. So we'll get this pulled up here. Okay. Now as we get this pulled up, the wires we're just going to kind of have here, we'll just separate the tape, and you'll see it matches up exactly to what our factory plug looks like. So what I'll do is just get this separated, and then we'll plug this in. And then this is going to go back into our taillight. Before I get the taillight put back in place, we'll just kind of continue on with our installation. Just make sure that this is, not pressed against anything. There's a plastic clip here, so just make sure that wire's in a safe spot. And then we can pop this back in. Before we get anything else mounted up, what I want to do is grab the green wire and those plugs, and we're going to route it up to the passenger side and get it all attached, just like we did on the driver's side. And this is going to be important to do this first, because once we get it plugged in, we can pull the slack back and make sure that this is mounted up. Something else you can do is also get your 4-pole routed over to where you want it, and more than likely you're going to want to use the safety chain loops to be able to get that mounted up. You can also pick up brackets here at eTrailer that allows you to bolt that up if you want something a little more secure, but to loop that on is pretty common and a great way to have that ready for whenever you need to tow your trailer. So I'll go ahead, I'll get this routed over and show you the path that I took, and I'm just going to zip tie this up to keep that away from the muffler. So we're routing the wire over. More than likely you already have your hitch installed, and that's going to be a great spot to be able to zip tie it up. Now, something to keep in mind, you have the exhaust tips on both sides. Make sure it's obviously not wrapped around there. And then I just kind of used the hitch here to zip tie it up as we went. I did the same thing with our 4-pole wiring, so I just kind of zip tied that up to where it's got a little bit of slack here. And later on, for a cleaner look, you can always go back and add some wire loom so you're not seeing all these wires. And then just brought it back over here. And at this point, we have our module, and we still have our ground and our power wire. So what I'll do now is just attach our power wire. That way we have it ready to go. And then we can get our ground mounted up, and then from there, then we mount it up. That way we're not getting too tight to where this isn't easily mountable. So I'll get this attached. Now, something that's not included in the kit that I recommend using is a heat shrink butt connector. And it's going to act like a normal butt connector, but once you're done crimping it down, you just heat that up and it's going to shrink around it, creating a nice watertight seal. And for something that lives on the exterior of the vehicle, it's going to be subject to any road grime, water, or corrosion long term. That heat shrink butt connector does a really good job of protecting that connection. So I'll get that attached now. Now with these, you just heat it up enough and you'll start to see it kind of become translucent a little bit, and then a little goop will come out the end, and that's when you know that it's sealed up. Now, if you're in the middle of this install and you don't want to go out and get these, not to worry. What you can use is the regular butt connectors that are included. Just recommend taking some electrical tape and really wrapping that around just to kind of create that nice seal. Now, I didn't find a great factory ground to get our ground wire and ring terminal mounted up, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drill this into the bottom side here with our self-tapping screw. So if you need to, you can do a small pilot hole. And when tightening this, you don't need to get crazy here. You just want it to where the ring terminal is not spinning around. But any tighter than that, you run the risk of stripping out the threads you just made. So I'll go ahead and get this mounted up. And you can see it's not going to spin. We'll go ahead, we'll grab our module, and we'll get this mounted up and all of our loose wires zip tied. So what I've found is the adhesive sometime to get this mounted up, it's a great option for a flat spot, and if that's the case, you're going to want to make sure you clean that surface. But there's also a hole on the end of the module that I tend to use to zip tie this up. The main thing is you don't want it rattling around long term as you're driving. So you can see that grommet there where there's a factory wire loom. I went ahead and just zip tied that up, and that way, you know, it's not really going to go anywhere. And then the rest of the wire, just make sure that this isn't going to make contact with the exhaust pipe. And so I'm just using the rest of that wire loom to zip tie this all up in a nice clean bundle. And then our power wire is going to route towards the battery. So finding a nice spot to where we can get this kind of by our self-tapping screw to route it forward is going to be key. So I'll get this all zip tied up nice and clean. Now for our power wire, we do need to run this up to the battery, which is located on the driver's side. And something that you're going to want to keep in mind is stay away from anything moving, whether it be suspension, anything hot, so exhaust or sharp as well. So what I did is I took our power wire, routed it up over our cross member. That way it stays away from the axles. You'll see it come down here. And I just kind of used some of the factory you know, like as far as like our filler neck here goes, I just go above that so it kind of supports itself. And occasionally just throwing some zip ties in here or there just to kind of keep it, you know, so it's not going to rattle loose. And then this underbody panel, if you come to the side, there's just a series of 10mm nuts. So if you take that down, this really opens it up to get a nice clean path. And then when we put this back up, that wire is going to stay protected. And then I made my way up over to this, we have this kind of cross member here. Now we're going to be using a fish wire technique to pull this up to the battery, and you got to make sure that you're not getting caught on sway bars or again any of those same things that I warned you about previous. And this is a pretty tight engine bay, so just double check a few times either underneath, up top as you feed that fish wire down that it has a nice clean path. And in fact, on the wheel well, on the inside here by the axles, it's kind of open to where you can start to see that path, and that might be the best way to get this routed. Either way, I got mine routed. I taped this up, so I'll pull this up from the engine bay, make sure everything's nice and tidy down here, and then we can start attaching to our 12-volt power. Pull up all your extra slack, and again, do a double check to make sure that it's not going to make contact with anything that's going to damage it long term. And obviously with the extra slack here, we're going to need to trim this off. But before doing that, I recommend getting the fuse holder in place so you can get a nice clean run of exactly how you want it. Now this is obviously in a loop. Fuse is not in it. We're going to keep it that way until we get everything hooked up. I'm just going to cut this here and strip back both ends of your fuse holder. And your fuse holder just acts as added protection of any backfeed. So that's the great thing about this wiring is it's not going to cause any issue if your trailer's faulty. So you have no risk of really damaging any of your factory wiring in the process. So we'll go ahead, we'll take our ring terminal, get this crimped down, and give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's attached properly. And then we can attach this to our positive terminal. So this one looks like it's a 10mm, so we'll get that taken off. And then the other end is what we're going to attach to our power wire. So I do recommend leaving yourself just a little bit of slack here. That way if you do need to kind of route this a little bit cleaner, you have that ability. So I'm just going to cut our power wire here. And then we'll strip that back. And I'm again using a heat shrink butt connector in our engine bay to get this all attached. Now we can put our fuse in place. And we'll cap this up. And then I'm going to just take some zip ties and get this zip tied up nice and clean. We should be able to get this slid back over as well. That's something, if you want to, you can route this nice and clean to where you won't be able to see that wire. Now is also a good time, if you haven't put your taillights back in place, go ahead and do that. Very tight here. There's not a whole lot of great spots. I might be able to get this to sneak in here, but if not, you might want to tuck that wire down. And that is fighting me here, so I'll just kind of see if I can't get this to tuck here. Hopefully we'll have enough wire. So just take your time. You don't want to damage anything here. There we go. Take your T25, tighten this back down, and get your caps put back in place. Check the light function. So we're going to simulate that using a 4-pole tester. This keeps it specific to the vehicle, but it's going to operate essentially the same lighting up as your taillights would on the trailer. So definitely make sure you do this. If you don't have your trailer handy, just before you hit the road, you want to make sure that these are working properly by running through the light signals and checking the trailer. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hop in, run through, make sure everything's working. We'll start with our running lights. Next we'll do our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. Now that we know that everything's working properly, you can either hook up to your trailer and hit the road, or just stow this on your safety chain loop for the next time you're ready to tow. But with that being done, you've officially installed your 4-pole trailer wiring harness on your Ford Edge.